Skeep Scott Boodle Bop Skiddly Dap Badap.
Zoom, 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 zoom. Okay, welcome back to Niche Appreciation Club, the series where lights burn out and I buy new lights used and they don't come with batteries, so I don't have good lighting. That's what that's what this series is about. Anyways, yeah, UFO 50. Woo! For those out of the loop, UFO 50 is a game of 50 games, and to paraphrase its Steam store page a bit, I don't know how to transition into that. These are not mini games or micro games. Although the size of each game varies, every one is a complete experience. Some of these games are shorter arcade-style games, but a lot of the games here are full-fledged experiences. The first time I heard about the name UFO 50, I immediately thought of the NES game Action 52, which, for those out of the loop, is a collection of 52 games, but the biggest difference is Action 52 is a collection of stinkers, and UFO 50 is a collection of bangers. According to the fictional lore of UFO 50, these games were developed by the company called UFO Soft, who were predominantly active in the 1980s. The games were recovered from a fictional computer called the LX whatever, and they were recovered by these people. I'm not sure if they're fictional or not, but these games were released as a game UFO 50 that I, a fictional person, am playing. And that framing gives this collection a better sense of unity as opposed to if like the real world developer Mossmouth had just said, hey, here's 50 games, go nuts. Giving all these games their own history, little in-universe trivia, and developers adds a lot of personality. So that's the general premise of the game. 50 games for the player to play. There's also this little fella that the player can unlock stuff for by fulfilling certain requirements. I like him. I've been playing this game for a couple months now, and while not every game is for me, I've found plenty of games that appeal to me. The first game I really clicked with was Hyper Contender, and honestly it's going to make for a good game to demonstrate what makes UFO 50 so special. It's this arena fighter where the goal isn't to pummel your opponent's health down to 0, but instead collect 5 rings before they do. I keep wanting to say 50 rings because of Sonic the Hedgehog, god dang. I love the rush when the game gets really frantic, which I didn't capture footage of, but it's a blast when it gets that way. And there's 8 characters to choose from, and they all have pretty different play styles. For example, here's Sephi. She can jump and flip for however long she wants, and as an attack is able to throw these hammers in these very peculiar arcs. She's my main, love her. Voltana is similar that they can jump and fly around, but unlike Sephi, they can fly wherever they want. And their attack is this laser beam that's diagonal, but it bounces off the walls, which can be kind of tricky to dodge. Braz can't jump at all, but they can flip gravity around to maneuver, and they have like these long-range missiles that they can fire. And Wreck also can't jump, but they can place these landmines that when stepped on will propel them upward, but those same landmines can also damage other opponents. Everything in UFO 50 is like this. It's filled with so many unique ideas, and it's always firing on all cylinders, even when it's something more conventional. The biggest piece of praise I can give UFO 50 is that it's consistently interesting. And if you've been curious to what else I've been enjoying in UFO 50, good news, I'm about to talk about that for a couple minutes. If you're not, also good news, you're watching this on a platform that lets you easily fast forward and skip parts you don't like. Or maybe you're a wise guy and you like downloaded the video and you're watching it on like VLC player or something, so what I said doesn't technically apply to you. Or maybe you went the extra mile and you put this on something really obtuse where the idea of fast forwarding or rewinding is like a hassle for whatever reason and it's not easy anymore. That's you. I don't know, you gotta know what's with the way of yourself. That's a weird situation to make. Also, I know the aspect ratio in the gameplay footage is wrong. It should be like this, but instead it's like this. I don't know what happened, but I kind of like how this looks, so I'm gonna leave it like that. It's also less work for me to do to turn this into this, so it should look like this, but I'm keeping it as this. The first game in the collection is Barbuda, a patient game where the player explores a dungeon filled with traps, enemies, and various hazards. It's very minimalistic, very quiet, and honestly kind of eerie. It's what the soul would call a mood. Most of my friends that have played UFO 50 can't stop raving about how much they love Barbuda. Like, they're full-fledged Barbunatics, and like, I get it, right? I get it. There's something about Barbuda that does pull me in when I pick it up. It's kind of ambient, and it's kind of beckoning me to go deeper into it. It actually reminds me of a game I was playing last year called La Mulana 2, and it's not nearly as moody as Barbuda, but mechanically speaking, they're very similar games. In fact, if you enjoyed Barbuda, you'll probably enjoy La Mulana 2, and vice versa. Maybe. La Mulana 2 can be kind of a dick sometimes. But I ended up dropping Lumble on it too, though, because I wasn't in the mood for that type of game. And I haven't really gotten that far in Barbuda for a similar reason. But both games do seem like something I'll enjoy when I'm like craving that flavor, and I'm looking forward to that day. I do enjoy its quote-unquote spiritual successor, Mooncat, though, even though it's also a game I haven't gotten that far into either. At first glance, I'm sure looking at the gameplay, this looks rather standard. But what if I told you this game has some really weird controls? This is a D-pad, and while I'm sure most of you are familiar with how it operates, just play along for a moment. In most games, if the player presses the left side, something in the game will move to the left. Press the right side, something will move to the right, up is up, down, whatever. Down and down is down. In Mooncat, pressing any direction on the D-pad causes this creature to move to the left. Pressing up moves them to the left. Pressing right to the left, up is left, down is left, whatever. So what do the buttons on the other side of the controller do? Well, hitting the buttons will cause the fella to jump, fair enough. But how does the player move to the right then? Well, that's what the buttons do. If the fella is not moving when I press anything and I hit one of the buttons, then they move to the right. And now the D-pad is what makes them jump. It's a really weird control setup. And it's really interesting because since I've been playing video games for basically my whole life, I haven't had to actively think and coordinate what my hands are doing with the controller in a long time. Like, if I want to turn this fella around or make them move, I have to be very aware of what I'm doing because it's very easy to accidentally make them jump instead, just due to the muscle memory of it.
In a way, I'm pretty sure this is how video game controllers feel to people that aren't that familiar with video games, that aren't as used to using these things, and instead have healthier hobbies like cooking or reading or exercise. Things that, you know, might be better for the brain than this. I don't know, I actually don't really believe in that. But, like, I don't know if this is a good bit to end on. But regardless, I'm right. That, like, that must be how this feels if you don't really do this that often. What did I drop it on? Nothing important.
One of the few games I've actually managed to beat is called Mortal. It's this puzzle game where the player starts with 20 lives, but in order to advance in the stage, those lives have to be used. Either by turning the characters into a block, flinging them into the wall to create a platform, or blowing them up to clear obstacles. But each one of those actions uses up a life. However, the amount of lives the player has leaving the stage is how many they will have going into the next one. So if they start with 20 lives, blow through 15 of them on the stage, they're only going to have 5 to work with on the following stage, giving them a major disadvantage as they'll have no wiggle room. The levels themselves have opportunities to gain lives though, so what Mortal ends up being is an exercise in optimization, and it's very satisfying when I finish a stage with more lives than I entered with.
There's some more games I could talk about at length, but it would drag the pace of the video down quite a bit. In fact, it did. So I'm just gonna speed run through real quick. I'm gonna race. I'm gonna go through it quick.
Magic Garden is a pretty simple, straightforward arcade game, but I love it a lot. It's a simple game of just getting these little blobs onto these stars and like pressing a button, but the ones that don't make it onto the stars that get left behind get all pissy and will try to attack the player afterwards. But the player can easily just wipe them off the board by picking up this tonic right here, becoming invincible, and then clearing them out. The more the player clears out when they're invincible, the bigger the score. But the more that are on the board, the more hectic the board gets. And the more hectic the board gets, the more likely I am to mess up somewhere and lose. Because I always get greedy when I get the most points. Warptank's an excellent game that's sort of a puzzle game, I guess. The player can't jump around, but they can zip to the opposite wall of them. And it's more about figuring out, there's also a gun, it's more about figuring out how everything in the level is moving, including enemies and the objects. And the goal is to do that effortlessly. So you just interweave between all of it. And when things get busier, it becomes taxing to keep track of everything that's going on. But when it all clicks, it's super satisfying to do. Night Manor is a horror point-and-click adventure game. The only game in the collection that requires a content warning. And I'm sure that even though it probably doesn't compare to something like Silent Hill or Signalis, it's still going to scare me because I'm a wimp. Porgy is a game that, honestly, I don't know much about it. I think it's an exploration type of game, but I think the submarine is cute, and that's enough for me to want to try it. And then there's Mini and Max, which looks like this really cool adventure game with this mechanic of growing and shrinking in a bedroom. I'm figuring it'll be a game of thinking about how I get to places when I'm small and having it to interact with the objects when I'm big in order to make progress. I'm also a sucker for the everyday objects become compelling level design when small genre. Althazar's Ooh, hey, my phone's on.
Alphazar's has to shoot him up on the ground. That's a pretty fun time, but I'm really kind of waiting until I have a friend to play this one with because it's actually a multiplayer game. A lot of games in the collection have 2-player options, and I need a friend to do this one because I cannot beat the first level no matter how hard I try.
Pilot Quest stands out with a very interesting mechanic in the collection of interesting mechanics. At first glance, it seems like a Zelda 1 clone with resource management, but it's actually a take on an AFK game, an away from keyboard game, as in a game that does things when someone's away from the keyboard. In order to progress in the game, various resources are required, mostly these crystals. Either the player could whip this thing and just do it slowly, or they could go to this tree and make a plant generate the crystals. But the game doesn't have to be open for those crystals to generate. As long as UFO 50 is open, the game will generate those resources. So while I'm sucking ass at Alphazar's hat, I'm blowing ass in Pilot Quest. Don't leave that in there. The last game I'll talk about is Seaside Drive. It's an arcade style shoot 'em up with some chill visuals. It's where the player in this little car goes pew 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 to all the things on the sky. In order to keep the gun at max power though, the player has to keep drifting as the plower? I hardly know her. Don't keep that. In order to keep the gun at max power though, the player has to keep drifting to the left as the power gradually goes down. It's a fun balance of trying to keep it at max power while also dodging projectiles. I haven't gotten past stage 2 though because I'm actually not that good at video games. Also for some reason, like the white blob reminds me of Toby Fox's dog Sona. Regardless, very fun game. One of my favorites in the collection. Can't wait to actually beat it.
There's also like RPGs and dungeon crawlers and beat 'em ups and platformers and party management simulators and like 2 golf games with very different ideas. This one's like a pinball golf idea and this one's like an adventure game. UFO 50 covers so many genres and it's always interesting what it does with those genres. But you know what the most interesting thing about UFO 50 is to me? It's evoking a feeling in me that I haven't had in a while. It's the feeling I got when, well, it's a feeling hypothetically, I would have gotten had I hypothetically illegally downloaded a bunch of ROMs from hypothetical websites and then played those hypothetical ROMs on my hypothetical legal emulator. That's not me being coy, by the way. I was too much of a weenie to pirate old games no one cared about. But maybe I should have. I feel like if I had played Earthbound as a teenager, maybe I would have had cooler interests and that led to better things. Like maybe I'd be headlining at Coachella right now had I pirated Earthbound and played it as a teenager. Instead, I make YouTube videos and comics and whatever. But maybe that's for the best. I'm not the biggest fan of seeing music live. Like I like it, but I'm not crazy about it. And I can't imagine I like playing music live either, so maybe it worked out. So anyways, yeah, I never downloaded a bunch of random NES games, but I did buy a bunch of random NES games, and I imagine that's like a similar feeling to what I just described.
I don't have a stunning NES collection. The amount of games I have at the console is rather modest and is mostly stuff I grabbed around in 2008. In fact, I can fit most of the collection, or all of it, in this old shoebox. I'm not sure yet. They haven't been in the shoebox for a while. And most of the games that I bought were just whatever I thought looked interesting and had like a reasonable price tag on them. Sure, I got like some of the classics like the Super Mario Bros. Duck Hunt combo cartridge and both the Zelda games, but my collection is mostly things like
Mendel Palace,
Solar Jetman,
Karate Champ,
games that are very much the type of game that often get left out of the larger discussion.
And since my collection of NES games is just a random assortment of whatever I found interesting, it bounces around pretty wildly between genre and quality.
Mendel Palace, for example, is a fun little game about flipping tiles to clear the board of enemies, and for the most part, it's a good time. It's not really that complicated, but it's fun.
Fun fact, this was the first game developed by Game Freak, the somewhat successful developers of Pokemon. Cool, right? I don't know how well known that fact is yet, but I'm hoping to get it there. Like, I don't think it's at the level of like, oh, Mario 2 is Doki Doki Panic, but I'm hoping if I can get that fact about Mendel Palace to that point, then the discussion of this game can go beyond that piece of trivia.
Solar Jetman is this game where the player explores a planet in order to recover parts of their ship. Touching the walls causes damage, touching enemies causes damage. It's about like getting through all that nonsense. I honestly haven't spent that much time with Solar Jetman, but these are some good looking sprites, and one day I'll probably sit down with it because it's kind of an interesting premise and all the mechanics seem to work just fine. Compare that to Karate Champ, a fighting game that doesn't work at all. The characters just fly around and everything lacks impact, which is pretty bad for a game in a genre where the entire point is making an impact. Overall, it feels very confusing to play this game.
And now that I'm thinking about it, a lot of UFO 50 games feel the same way, like kind of confusing to play at first. Outside of like a short blurb and like what the controls do, the player is typically just tossed in and left to figure out what to do for themselves, which, Again, very similar to what playing random NES games feels like to me.
Thankfully, UFO 50 is designed a lot better, so it's more intuitive to figure out what is going on compared to games like this, like, what?
And it's wild to me that UFO 50 reminds me of those NES days at all. And to be clear, I'm not saying like UFO 50 reminds me of NES games. I'm saying UFO 50 reminds me of how I played NES games, because my NES game collection was just a random assortment of whatever I thought looked interesting based on minimal information. And if the game turned out to be lousy, whatever, it was neat to experience, but if it turned out to be good, even better. Kind of like the whole kid in the candy store feeling, but I guess it'd be more apt to say nerdy kid in the library. And jump cut. And it's cool that UFO 50 is giving me that feeling at all. And it is recreating that feeling authentically, but it is doing it indirectly. To get the point across, I'm going to talk about another game called Hypnospace Outlaw for a bit. One of my favorites, by the way. This game is a bit of a love letter to 90s web, which I'm too young to have experienced in its prime, but, I caught the tail end of it. Hypnospace Outlaw takes place on various web pages that the player interacts with through a browser, and I gotta say that I actually feel like I'm web surfing when I play this game. It's a pretty wild feeling that I can't say I've had anywhere else. But that feeling is intentional by the design of Hypnospace Outlaw. Like, I might have prior experience with old websites that's given me a sense of familiarity when playing, but even without those life experiences, I would still feel like I am web surfing in a faux 90s internet, because that's kind of the point of the game. It's designed that way. Now with UFO 50, I get reminded of surfing through NES games, but that is not a feeling I can have without that prior experience in my life. If I never picked up those games and played them back in the day as a teenager, there isn't a way I could get that feeling from UFO 50, and it can't really be designed to elicit that response from me intentionally, because what I am feeling as an emotion is unrelated to UFO 50 entirely, because what I am feeling is tied to my experiences. And that's cool. That's so cool. I think it's awesome. Obviously, the creator can create like moments in a game or book or whatever that are supposed to elicit certain emotions, obviously, but they can't intercept everything. And I think it's really cool that my personal experiences are like affecting my opinion of UFO 50. If anything, it makes me enjoy UFO 50 even more than I would if I didn't have them to begin with. And is that objective? No, it's fully subjective, but I don't care. I want more of that. I want to hear someone talk about Karate Champion be like, yeah, I love this game. It's not good, but I love this game because it's a game that my dad and I played growing up after school, and it was something we got to bond over. I need to hear more of that because that's the kind of thing that makes all of this bigger than it is.
Because ultimately what makes me enjoy a game isn't how impressed I am with mechanics or how fantastic the presentation is. I mean, that matters, but ultimately the only thing that matters is how I feel when the credits roll. And that feeling I get from UFO 50 might not be an exclusive thing to me. I'm sure there are others out there that had a similar experience to me and can relate exactly with what I'm talking about, but it's not a universal feeling that everyone playing UFO 50 is going to get. And vice versa, there are absolutely things out there that people are going to enjoy for reasons that I can't ever experience firsthand, but they can tell me about those reasons and I can learn something from that. I can gain a deeper appreciation for something by learning how it's viewed through someone else's shoes or whatever. Probably a little smelly. Why am I viewing through the world through a pair of sneakers? I feel like I meant to write eyes here.
Having feelings about art is what makes art human. I'd even argue that until someone has feelings about a creative work, that creative work isn't anything more than a exercise and effort. But I think that's beautiful. I think the fact that one piece of whatever can have so many different emotions tied to it is incredible. Emotions that I could never even begin to imagine until I start talking to people and listening to what they say. I think that's one of the best things about engaging with like art, right? Games and movies and music and media and yada, yada, yada. That's one of the best things about it. The fact that so many things can be felt from different reasons and different people and whatever, but the only way I'm gonna get an iota of that is by talking to you. And that's such a great feeling. I should really learn how to end my videos, but...